Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today that is all around McAfee Advanced Threat Defense. So we're joined here by Dave Messett from McAfee, who will be going through the webinar with you.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just sorting out my screen here. As Amy said, my name's Dave Messett, and I'm Head of Product and Solutions Marketing for EMEA here at McAfee. And today I wanted to talk about the challenges of malware generally, but given the goings-on of the last 10 days or so with the WannaCrypt outbreak, I'm going to focus this a little more around ransomware specifically, because I know that's top of everyone's mind right now. But I do want you to keep in mind as we go through this that whilst I'm focusing on ransomware, keep in mind that ransomware in most senses is just another form of malware. And so the strategies, the solutions, if you like, that we need to implement to defeat ransomware are in most ways the same strategies that we need to implement to defeat other more stealthy forms of malware. So to focus in specifically on that ransomware piece, just to kick off, I wanted to start with a brief summary really of why we care so much about this one type of problem. And fundamentally it boils down to the fact that it's hugely expensive. We know from research that we've done that the cyber criminals behind Cyberwall 3, for example, and keep in mind that's a single version of a single variant of malware, those cyber criminals made well over $300 million from that one variant. That's money paid out by companies and by individuals in order to release their data. Secondly, and kind of irrespective of the financial costs, there are real human costs, and we saw that in spades last week. The WannaCrypt outbreak in the UK affected almost half of our health service trusts. We saw literally thousands of operations that had to be cancelled that day, and potentially it may well be that lives were lost as a result. So the damage can be incredibly serious, and so of course it's something that we at McAfee are very focused on, and something that I'm sure you are desperately trying to stay clear of. Now there's kind of an interesting anomaly in the numbers here, and the latest numbers that we have are from Q4. Actually, we're due to release the Q1 numbers any day now. But those latest numbers actually show a marked decline in ransomware. And I've spoken to a number of people since these numbers were released about 3 months ago that saw them and kind of made an assumption that perhaps we're past the worst of the problem. Maybe some of the new technologies that we'll come on and talk a little about, have perhaps seen us through the worst of it. The reality, unfortunately, is that we always need to be really wary of statistics, and what these statistics specifically show us is the amount of generic ransomware has dropped, the amount of sort of widespread phishing has reduced. So if you think about how this very often spreads, most phishing attacks are pretty much automated now, and part of that automation ensures that the malware is continually changed very slightly. Just a couple of bytes in the file get modified, that file gets recompiled, and yeah, we've got a new, never before seen piece of malware. It's fundamentally designed to ensure that a single signature won't render the entire phishing campaign defunct. But if we look at WannaCrypt again, this was a single piece of malware that beyond the first machine in any given network didn't actually spread via phishing or by any of the other methods that we typically associate with malware, but rather it spread by leveraging a vulnerability in Windows to move across the network. It's why the companies that were hit by this tended to lose a very high proportion of their machines rather than just kind of isolated systems where perhaps an end user made a mistake. Coming back to these numbers, that would actually show in these statistics as a single piece of malware, despite the fact that it's infected around about 350,000 systems globally. Now, there's another key challenge when we look at ransomware specifically, and that is that unlike traditional forms of malware, we can't really allow the first machine that gets hit by it, that what we call patient zero, we can't allow that system to be compromised while we go through an identification process to establish that we do have a problem. Because by the point we've gone through that process, the encryption cycle will have happened, and cleaning up a system that has been encrypted is a much more time-consuming activity than historically has been the case with other types of malware. And it's a nuance that's specific to ransomware, but at the same time doesn't actually change the underlying problem that we're all facing, and that is keeping all forms of malware out of our environment is a critical task that we face. So hopefully we're kind of all in agreement that this is something that we care about very, very much. But I wanted to just take a moment to really understand how ransomware actually executes. And this is really important because it highlights a number of steps that the malware actually goes through. And it gives us, as the good guys, a number of opportunities to stop it. So here's how a typical attack occurs. A piece of malware gets delivered. That might be a drive-by download. It might be a US memory stick, an email attachment, all of the sort of the normal attack vectors that we're used to seeing. In the case of WannaCrypt, it was a little different, as I mentioned, because that spread via a sort of a worm. But nonetheless, the process here is actually the same in that it got delivered in that initial instance. That payload will leverage some kind of exploit, or another way to put that, it'll take advantage of some kind of vulnerability on an endpoint. And like ransomware or other forms of malware, really, at this point, they'll normally try and make contact with a command and control server. Now, up to here, there's really no difference between ransomware and all the other types of malware. It changes at this point because where normal malware will make contact with that command and control server, perhaps start to steal files, update itself, whatever it might do, all whilst staying hidden, what ransomware does is it makes contact in order to get the encryption keys that it needs. And once those are obtained, the process can start encrypting all of the files. After that, a ransomware notice will get issued, and basically your system is, for want of a better word, screwed. And the process that a criminal now wants you to go through is to pay them for the decryption keys so that you can get your systems back up and running and get back to work. So the key question really is, what is it that we can do? And before I start to talk about the technology aspects and the types of technology that we can put in place to address this, there is actually one area where you can make a huge difference really without any technology at all. And that's the area of education. The vast majority of malware attacks that we see are actually delivered via phishing emails, utilizing executable files, and they actually take hold because a user somewhere in your organization opens that file, clicks that link, executes that unknown application, makes a mistake, for to kind of get really simple about it. So job number one is actually to educate your entire organization about how they can be more careful with their IT usage. And critically, it's to help them understand their own individual importance in keeping the company malware free. Because your HR people, they're not on the front line of this stuff. They're just going about their daily job. Their expertise is not IT security. Their expertise is HR. They probably don't even see themselves as part of the process that can help keep the company more secure. We need to help to educate them and make it clear to them that they are absolutely part of that frontline defense. But in reality, that's never going to be 100% effective. If we can increase the effectiveness, that's great, but you're never going to get everyone to behave perfectly. And some of those phishing emails are incredibly believable. There are going to be times when malware gets through. And in an ideal world, they're going to hit a machine that is fully patched, has as few vulnerabilities as possible, and so on. Right? Let's not forget that WannaCrypt from a week or so ago, that actually utilized a vulnerability that Microsoft patched back in March, but there were still hundreds of thousands of systems that hadn't actually put that patch into place. So that's kind of key point number two. Wherever possible, ensure the machines are patched. But even that is still going to leave us open to zero-day vulnerabilities, and you're not going to sort those out even with the latest patches installed. Now, I'd like it if everyone used application control, which will help even to resolve those challenges. But we know that lots and lots of businesses out there aren't using application control for a whole variety of reasons, and that's probably a webinar in its own right. So I don't want to kind of drive down into that today. And once we're past that application control element, then we're really at the AV or anti-malware situation. Now, traditionally, we think of those as signature-based, and signature-based has its place. There are good and bad things about it, but it's kind of a bit standard. I'm sure everybody on the call today kind of already understands what signature-based systems can and can't do. So what I wanted to do today is kind of look at that next generation security and what that can do to help us. Now, when we talk about next-gen security, it tends to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And frankly, as an industry, we have lots and lots of new players in this space, and many of them are shouting very loudly that next-gen security equals one thing or it equals another thing. That might be artificial intelligence or endpoint detection response, machine learning, or quite frankly, a whole raft of other buzzwords and technobabble. And the key point here, if you take only one thing away from the webinar today, I'd like it to be this. Next-gen security is not any one of these things. It's all of them. But more than all of them, it's actually all of them plus whatever comes tomorrow, and whatever comes next week, and whatever comes next month, and so on and so on. Next-gen security is about delivering the latest capabilities to your environment whenever you need them. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail shortly about why any one of these is not the silver bullet to all of your requirements. But before I do that, I want to talk a little about machine learning specifically, because I've spoken to a lot of customers over the last few months who've frankly been a little bit unsure about what it actually means. Like it's more industry jargon. And I want to try and cut through some of that today and explain actually what machine learning is. And hopefully with that level set in place, it'll help to really understand our implementations in this particular space. So on this chart, you'll see two sets of faces. And very, very obviously, all the faces on the left-hand side are mannequin heads or doll heads. And all the faces on the right-hand side are a real person, pulling a variety of different faces. Now, if I were to take any one individual face from this page and ask anyone on the call here, are you looking at a real human being or are you looking at a mannequin, you'd immediately be able to tell me, right? But you probably wouldn't be able to explain to me how you know, why you know that you're looking at what you're looking at. You just kind of know. It's instinctive. It's hardwired into our brains. Now just think about that for a minute in terms of how we write code, how we write algorithms for computers. We break everything down into a highly logical sequence of the ultimately binary choices. And then we create code appropriate to those choices. But if we don't know the logic, if we can't explain the logic, then we can't write the code. We can't write an algorithm if we don't understand what it is we're writing. And if you tried to write an algorithm to decipher which faces were real and which weren't, I guarantee you would really, really struggle. And I know that's true because a great many people, a great many companies have tried to do exactly that with facial recognition in the past. And to be honest, no one has yet come up with a really great answer. But given that we're all able to do it, everyone on this call can do it, we know that it must be possible. And the way that we actually enable a computer to kind of get this level of understanding is actually to feed millions of real faces into that computer and tell the computer these are real, and feed them millions of images that are not real faces and tell the machine these ones are not real faces. And then we just allow the machine to determine what characteristics it should use, what algorithm it should come up with in order to deliver something that is actually usable. And in really simple terms, that's actually what machine learning is. It's the machine creating its own algorithm based on a large volume of data that we have provided it. And that's actually exactly what we do to create an algorithm for identifying malware as well. We feed it lots of real malware and lots of things that are not malware, and then we allow the computer to create a statistical model, if you like, that will identify attributes of malware code. Because most malware shares some features. In a lot of cases, actually shares some of the code base, but certainly shares a lot of features. And we can use that model to establish, that statistical model, to establish whether a brand new piece of code, something that we've never seen before, is likely to kind of fit into the cluster of things that we know as good, or fit into the cluster of things that we know as bad. So whatever words you hear to describe this process, machine learning, AI, Bayesian analysis, probability clustering, whatever it might be, they're basically all saying the same thing. It's about using statistical analysis, statistical comparisons to produce better predictions about codes that we've never seen before, codes that we don't have an actual predefined this is good or this is bad answer for. So let's have a quick look at the first way that we've implemented that type of machine learning into the McAfee endpoint suite. And essentially what we've done is to create an algorithm that looks at the static attributes of files. So things like, is the file new? Where did it come from? What type of file is it? Does the file type match the file extension? Is it packed? What compiler was used? Lots and lots of different static attributes. And we know that the malware authors frankly can't recreate or modify all of those attributes every time they want to tweak their particular piece of malware. They tend to tweak a tiny bit, modify a few bytes here and there, and then simply recompile. And that is enough to defeat an old signature, because that signature is based on that precise file as it was. You change one byte, it's not the same precise file. But making those minor changes isn't going to be enough to defeat what we call real protect static, our static machine learning capability, because this technology isn't reliant on a specific signature, as defined by that file hash. Now, one of the key things to note here is that because we're looking at static attributes, we can do all of this pre-execution. So before a file can load into memory or execute in any way, before it can leverage any vulnerability that may exist on the system, it's checked, and if we believe the file is malware, then it can be blocked or cleaned, deleted, whatever it might do. It can't do any damage is the key point, because it never even gets the chance to load into memory. Now, I mentioned earlier that next-gen is not a single technology, right? Pre-execution machine learning sounds ideal. Sounds like isn't that the way you'd want to identify all malware? Before it can even load. And yeah, if you could, that would be a great way to do it. But machine learning actually works slightly differently to the old signature-based way that we're kind of all used to. And the real difference is this: it doesn't give you a definitive answer that something is definitely bad. Right? Instead of that, it actually gives us a statistical estimation that something is likely to be bad. But equally, and perhaps more importantly, when it determines that something is good, again, it's only statistically likely to be good. So on that basis, and whilst being able to make those predictions based on pre-execution, that's fantastic. I don't think you want to be solely reliant on that pre-execution protection, because if you were to be solely reliant on that, then on the small number of occasions where the algorithm thinks that statistically a file is good when actually it's bad, well, then you'd have no second line of defense. So actually, we need to kind of build this stuff up in layers. And that's really why we have a second implementation of machine learning. And this one we call Real Protect Dynamic. What this does is it actually looks at the behavioral trace of a piece of code once it's executing. And then if it starts to behave in a way that, again, statistically looks like malware, statistically fits our sort of bad cluster, then again we can identify it as such and act accordingly. So we fed in millions of examples of good behaviors, not static attributes this time, but actual execution behaviors, and we've fed in millions of examples of bad behaviors, and again allowed the machine to come up with a behavioral based model of what looks good and what looks bad. Now, at this point, even if it looked like, if a file looked like it wasn't going to do something wrong to the pre-execution engine, we don't forget about it. We allow it to run, but we monitor the execution, and then if a few seconds or a few minutes down the line, it suddenly looks actually, this is behaving in a way we don't like, or then we can kill it if needs be. It's those layers of protection, multiple different but complementary techniques that ultimately gives you the best protection for your business. Now, there is, of course, a little bit of a gotcha here, and that is that what that means is if RealProtect Static allows a file to execute, then that file is going to, at the very least, start what it's designed to do. So if we come back to the kind of the focus around ransomware particularly, that begs the question, well, how many files could be encrypted? What damage could be done in those few seconds or maybe minutes that code is executing before RealProtect Dynamic says, I don't like this, it's doing something bad, let's kill it? How many files might have been encrypted and deleted? How much damage could have actually been incurred by your business? And the answer is that we don't want even a single file to get encrypted. We don't want a single file to get deleted. And that's why, in addition to the two new detection engines, we've also delivered something that we call dynamic application containment. Now, this particular technology doesn't identify anything as good or as bad. It doesn't convict malware, if you like. It doesn't kill any processes, delete any bad files, quarantine anything. All it's designed to do is to contain an unverified process. So let me back up a little and put that in real terms, right? In the event that a file hits our endpoint, and let's assume that we have no known signature for it, and that RealProtect Static allows it to execute. It thinks that statistically it's likely to be good. Two things are going to happen. RealProtect Dynamic is going to kick in and start to trace it, but while that's happening, in the meantime, we're already running through these steps here. We'll check to see if we've got a good reputation for the file. If it's known bad, then signatures are already going to have stopped it. If it's known good, then fine, we're okay. But if it falls in between, then we're going to get a reputation score that reflects that this is greyware, if you want to call it that. And at that point, DAC will continue to allow the file to execute, but only within a set of predefined, pre-specified parameters. So the process can then continue while RealProtect Dynamic traces the behaviors in parallel, but even though it's executing, even though it's running, it can't actually do anything that our rules disallow. And then subsequently, when we get a good or a bad result from the other technologies, maybe that's RealProtect Dynamic, maybe you've got advanced threat defense, our sandboxing technology, whatever else you might have that's tracing that. If we get a bad result from any of that in parallel, we can then kill the process, still without suffering any damage, or of course we can simply release the restrictions that are in place because we now know that file's good. Now what that means in the case of ransomware is nothing would get encrypted. In the gap between the ransomware starting to execute and us subsequently identifying it as bad and killing it, nothing has been encrypted. It's a fail-safe, if you like. And again, it kind of comes back to the layers of protection that you need to defeat, the very latest and most sophisticated malware. You want to have signatures. They're the best and simplest way of identifying known bad. You want to have pre-execution analysis. You want to have during execution analysis, if you like, and you want to have containment technologies that that can prevent damage. This is all adding up to what I think true next generation security equates to today. But you also want something that is adaptable enough to take whatever tomorrow's new technology is, to keep yourself at the forefront, to keep your business as protected as possible. But you know what? If history has taught us anything, it's that there's really no such thing as 100% foolproof security. And I mentioned earlier that pre-execution analysis in an ideal world is the best way to stop something. But you do need a backup in case you don't catch it at that point. And we talked about DAC being that backup, being that fail-safe to keep you secure while other technologies try and identify potential malware. And endpoint detection and response, EDR, it's another one of those backups, another layer in what you might call the ideal security system. And of course you want to keep the bad stuff out. That's kind of what we've talked about up to this point. But at the same time, the truly sensible approach with security is to assume that worst case scenario, the bad guys will find a way in. And if that happens, then you also need to be monitoring your environment, watching for critical events or specific activities. To put it another way, you want to be proactively hunting for anything that might have evaded all of those defenses in order that you can eradicate it as soon as possible. And of course, we're talking more about stealthy malware here than something like ransomware that jumps out in your face and tells you that you've been infected. But that stealthy malware, you need to go and hunt it. If it has snuck through your defenses, then it could potentially sit there for months and months and months, stealing data or monitoring various activities across your business. And I kind of come back to my central point here that next-gen security isn't a single technology. It's an environment. It's an environment in which you bring multiple technologies together to deliver the best security that you can. And that, as I say, that environment needs to be adaptable enough to integrate the new technology when it arrives, so that you can take advantage of it. And I'm not going to talk about McAfee Active Response specifically in the interest of time today, because I want to make sure that I allow time for any questions. But I wanted to flag it because it very much sits in that category of being an additional layer. And for anyone out there that is looking for EDR capability specifically, it's certainly something to take a look at in more detail. Let me sum up. There are basically 4 key takeaways that I'd like you to keep in mind as you go about the rest of your day today and in future. And these are, I think, the 4 key things in protecting against malware. Number 1, educate your end users. It's probably the cheapest, dare I say, the easiest thing that you can do to have a really quick, really positive impact in reducing the amount of malware that threatens your environment. You know, absolutely something that you should be focusing on if you're not already. The second thing is utilizing multiple technologies. That really has a positive cumulative effect. It's kind of a greater than the sum of its parts argument. And you don't want to use one single silver bullet solution. You don't want to use, for example, pre-execution analysis, because what happens on the odd occasion when that fails. The same way you don't want to just use signatures, or you don't want to just use post-execution analysis and behavioral analysis. But at the same time as ensuring that you have layers of solutions, it's really important to remember that unless those solutions are integrated in some way, you're going to leave yourself facing a nightmare of trying to get that stuff integrated and working together yourselves. Yeah, at the end of the day, and particularly so with ransomware, but to a lesser extent, this is true for all forms of malware, it's really all about the endpoint. If your endpoint security fails, there's not going to be anything behind that is going to save you. So it really is the sort of the final frontier. It's where so much of your data is stored, and certainly in the case of ransomware, that's the bit that's ultimately going to get hit and encrypted. And lastly, I want to leave you with securing the knowledge, if you like, that at McAfee we have a raft of cutting-edge technology, cutting-edge advancements designed to keep your business as secure as it possibly can be. And please go talk to your good friends at Bytes about how they can help you to get that up and running in your businesses. And with that, it really only remains for me to say thank you very much indeed for your time this morning and for your attention. I know this has been quite a speedy run through, and my apologies for that, but I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. And what I'll do now is turn back to Amy to see if there are any questions at all that have come through. Amy, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dave. Okie dokes. Yep, so if you do have any questions, there is a questions box. You can just pop those in there and I'll read those out for Dave. So Sean has just said, thank you, really interesting webinar. He said, but this particular compromise only proliferated due to on-premise bad practice and lack of controls.
Which particular compromise are we talking about? Are we talking WannaCrypt? Of course, Sean can't talk.
Yes, yeah, he said yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, or it's certainly true to some extent. We believe that the first instance in any organisation was ultimately down to phishing. So that's down to an end user somewhere, opening a file that they shouldn't have. I think we come back to my point around education at that point. If that user hadn't executed it, probably the entire organization would have been safe. Once that one person had executed it, then it moved around the rest of the organization because of the fact that those systems weren't patched. It used that SMB exploit from within Windows, and that's absolutely true. At the same time, if all of those endpoints had been suitably protected with the right endpoint protection, we could have still caught it, even without Windows being patched. But I kind of come back to, you know, there are multiple layers in this, and the endpoint protection is one of those layers. Or you can argue it's multiple layers, but you know, education, patching, application control, these are all things that could have also stopped this particular outbreak.
Thanks, Dave. He said thank you, appreciate that. Thank you, Sean. So we have one more question here that says, are these new capabilities available in VSE 8.8?
No, they're not. We announced, so by the new capabilities, I'm thinking of the, so let me take a step back, sorry. The signature type stuff, yeah, of course, absolutely. 8.8 and way back beyond that. The kind of the three new technologies that I've really talked about today, Real Protect Static, Real Protect Dynamic, and Dynamic Application Containment, actually none of those are available in VSE. DAC was announced with ENS version 10.2 around about this time last year, maybe just a little bit later in the year last year. And the two versions of Real Protect, they come with the ENS 10.5 release, which was sort of towards the back end, November, December time last year. In order to take advantage of them, you need to migrate onto the latest system, and there's no way, unfortunately, that we can kind of reverse engineer them back to previous versions, because the core platform underwent such a fundamental change between VSE and ENS that there's just, it would take tens of thousands of man hours of work to reverse engineer them back onto the old platform. So, you know, if you want this new stuff, then migrate to the latest versions, and it's all there for you.
Thank you, Dave. Another question has said, is it true that all you need to do to defeat signatures is change a few bytes in a file?
Yes, yeah, it is, and well spotted. If you've ever picked up on that. Well, technically, actually 1 byte in a file would do it. So because of the nature of the way that signatures work, fundamentally, when a file is compiled, that generates a unique hash for that file. And the way signatures work is that they look at the hash of the file, and then they compare it to a list of known bad hashes. And it's a limitation of signatures, because literally if you change a single byte in a file, and that doesn't have to change the code, right? Because you can add comments into files. So you change one letter of a comment in the file, and then when you compile that, it will generate a different hash to the previous version. And if the previous version is known to the signatures, you know, the new version might not be. So yeah, that's a limitation of signatures, and it's absolutely true. One byte is enough.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we've got for today. So thank you everyone so much for joining the webinar today. Hope you found it really useful, and also thank you so much, Dave, for presenting. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is a feedback form, so if you would like any more information or a follow-up call, then just pop that in there, or if you'd like to submit any questions, there is an email address there, tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. So thanks again everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day today. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.